there was this New York Magazine article that ran online in the Cut about women quiet quitting their marriages. It's like there's a meeting every month where there has to be a new way to talk about this.
Like, it's quiet quitting your marriage.
What does that
It's called
mean?
cheating.
Exactly?
Fuck off.
And the author had just completely
quiet fucking my secretary.
We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column.
Greetings and welcome back to another exciting installment of the Fifth Column podcast. This is your weekly rhetorical assault on the news cycle, the people that make it, occasionally ourselves. I'm Kmele Foster. I'm delighted to be here. I'm joined by Michael Moynihan, Matt Welch, and joined in the studio today. Josh, you were here like a year ago?
A year
maybe?
ago.
Literally
just a year ago. It was right after the election.
To have you back. Yeah. For your sophomore installment
yes.
of the Fifth Column. Josh Barro is with us. Very serious newsletter on Substack, Central Air podcast.
Yes.
Do you have other affiliations that I should be promoting right now?
I'm a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, it seems important.
Yeah. A little humble brag there. Have you ever just gone for the Barro? Have you just
Barro?
Yeah.
Barro.
I'm going to roll this
Should
R.
we roll the R?
Well, I mean,
like
it's a
actually.
fake name. The family name was Berkowitz, and my grandfather
Oh,
changed
really?
it.
One of those.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you try to
One
hide
of
it.
those. They're called
Josh
Jews.
Berkowitz?
Hi, hello,
Yeah.
I'm Josh Berkowitz.
Yeah.
Serious. We had the conversation which provoked a flood of listener email of who was the last Hollywood star to change his name to make it sound less Jewish. And I said it's got to be Jon Stewart.
John Stewart Leibowitz.
John Leibowitz.
Yeah.
And
It's not.
It was, what was the correction?
The guy who's usually fat and sometimes not.
Yeah, who he's not fat, the one that's in the Superbad.
Jonah Hill.
There you go.
Yeah, Feldstein.
What's his real
Jonah Feldstein.
Okay.
Yeah, which sounds maybe a bit Catholic. I don't know why he changed it.
Is the name changing though still about anti-Semitism, or is it a matter of just having something that's a little more compact?
I mean, if you watch an old Hollywood movie, and it says like Danny Kaye, and it's always like Chaim Perlgott or something, and you look at all of them, it's a game that you play, and it just doesn't exist much anymore, which is progress for America.
There was a lot of German and Central European too, though, like Czech or Hungarian or whatever, and they're awkward names. You want to straighten them out.
You also aren't allowed to have a name that's the same as another active SAG member.
Correct.
Which is
That's
why
right.
you
Oh,
like
really?
why
Is
you
that
get things
a
like
formal-
Michael
there's a formal
B. Jordan.
prohibition on
Yes,
this?
that's it.
Yeah.
There is. It's in the SAG AFTRA rules.
Yeah.
You can't have the same name.
Is there a Nazi Michael Moynihan in SAG-AFTRA as well?
There are a lot of Nazi monks. You're sitting next to one of them. I found out he was Berkowitz, and I've called an Uber. No, there's no. And I had to do that at one point when I was doing the voiceover for that HBO show. I had to be a part of the whole thing. Yeah, they don't let you do it if you're not part of a union. Yeah.
And so, are
are
you
the-
Michael Moynihan, or was
I
that
think I'm
taken
the
already?
only one. I don't think there's any others. There's a big scramble for that name, but Matt has mentioned this because I did write a piece for the Daily Beast one time about the confusion between me and the other Michael Moynihan, who is a white nationalist, and and he's also from Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
And he wrote a book about Norwegian death metal, and I lived in Sweden, so there's a lot of parallels that I said, finally, I want to clarify this. I wrote a piece about it.
Have you two been seen in the same room?
No, I don't. I've never actually. I don't even know what he looks like.
I don't think so.
But you know how I knew he was a Nazi to begin with? He had a band called Blood Axis.
Ooh.
Oh,
Sounds
yeah,
like a Nazi
that'll do
band.
it.
Just sounds like a bit Nazi. But
Well,
anyway,
this is good timing for you returning here. We are, what is it, the 7th today?
Yes.
It's January
Yes.
7th, so yesterday was January 6th, the anniversary. Well, my mom's birthday, as everyone knows, is the reason to talk about it.
Happy birthday,
But
Mom.
also the anniversary of the unpleasantness back
Yes.
in 2021. And it also puts us at close to the 1-year mark for the Trump administration. And since we talked to you shortly after the election last go around, I am very curious to know how you feel about all of the things that have transpired. The fact that we are on the verge of taking over Venezuela and Greenland more than anyone could have imagined, I think, is the way I would describe all of the accomplishments of the Trump administration thus far. Is that not correct, Michael Moynihan?
No, I thought you were going to go because you sent this to us, and I didn't have a chance to look at it, and I don't know if Josh did because it was all over Twitter. Of the administration has a website or a subsection of the White House.
The new page.
A new page about January 6th?
Yes.
Yeah.
Giving
Yeah.
the true history.
It's
of
the true
January
history.
The
6th.
Nancy
Wow.
Pelosi riot of January 6th.
How disloyal Mike Pence was.
Is that literally on the government
Yes.
website?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's fabulous. I mean, the police were responsible for not agitating that day, but for escalating the violence. And we can just run through it really quickly. President Trump invites Americans to D.C.
Nice.
President Trump delivers powerful speech.
Very nice.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Patriots march to the Capitol. Capitol
Including
Police.
the guy that had the Camp Auschwitz T-shirt on.
Well,
He's a patriot.
You're going to have
Of
a few
different
bad
country in a
apples.
different time.
Capitol Police response escalates tension. President Trump urges calm, which is interesting, but anyways. And then leaked Pelosi video reveals security lapses. Ashley Babbitt murdered in cold blood.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's been adjudicated formally. Mike Pence refuses to act.
But by the way, stop on that for a second, because when we sat down, I hadn't seen this. I'd been out doing something else. That there was a shooting in Minneapolis, an ICE shooting. And I quickly looked at the video, and the person is told to stop, drives forward and is shot. And I guarantee you that will be the argument that this is totally fine, right? You will find it from people in MAGA world, which is exactly what happened to Ashley Babbitt. She was told to stop and retreat, and she didn't, and she got shot.
Although that is a generous characterization, because she was involved in being in a place where she wasn't supposed to be.
Correct.
One imagines
not in a public street.
that there were lots and lots of people screaming orders like, don't do the thing.
Yeah.
And she wasn't trying to come through a door or driving her car down a street. Someone was smashing out a window, and they were entering a space illegally.
Yeah.
And then she gets shot by
there
law
will be
enforcement.
a different standard for the police telling you to stop doing something.
But if
in that case, in this case,
if that's murder, then this is obviously murder in Minneapolis. But Mike Pence refuses to act, and we could certainly imagine what that is all about.
Refuses to act. Who are these headline writers?
It's stolen election certified. President Trump silenced, which refers to him being taken off of all the various social media platforms.
That's true.
And I could go on because there is
It's a
more,
lot,
but you can imagine how people have responded to this. They are relieved. They are happy that we have finally corrected the historical record.
Really crazy.
I do find it unbelievably frustrating that the Trump administration insists on doing stuff like this. You could largely ignore it. You could kind of do your counter messaging.
Well, also
but they
pardon all the
always
people.
go so much
Yeah,
further.
Cardinal, that's the actual
I mean,
problem.
that's the bigger thing. Thousands of people who committed crimes. Some of them very serious crimes. Obviously, a lot of those people were just convicted of parading in the Capitol, but those people weren't in prison because they'd been convicted of minor offenses. But then you had people who were trying to beat police officers to death.
Yeah, I mean, there were some people though who were almost certainly overcharged in different ways, who were accused of being parts of seditious conspiracies.
I mean, maybe. I mean, people get overcharged in lots of situations all the time. It's it's a good reason not to go try to invade the Capitol.
This is a fair point.
There was a video. Did you see this one? I think it was from yesterday. Some guy who they posted in front of, I can't remember what federal building, something in D.C., but someone retweeted and pointed out that he was a pardoned January 6th rioter who was giving a Sieg Heil.
Yeah, they haven't covered themselves
in front of some
glory.
federal building to a gaggle of people with phones, and some other guy with an American flag dropping N-bombs and giving Sieg Heils.
I mean, it's not
that man is a patriot.
We don't lack for video footage of the event in which the people were taking a flag and assaulting police officers with
but what
it.
did the police officer do before that? Matt Welch.
That's a good
I think
question.
that's the point you're missing.
The point that I'm making
Boston in the 70s and busing.
It was actually it's just, as I said after Charlie Kirk got assassinated, people who were responding to this and saying it's terrible that there's violence in America, and political violence and leftist violence in particular. You will know them by their seriousness for how they responded to Trump's pardoning of people who committed violence, pled out in many cases, or got convicted for committing violent acts on that day. And most people who criticize one don't criticize the other. And you're not going to get serious about political violence in this country until you say, oh, we shouldn't pardon people who did political violence of some of the most upsetting kind that we've ever seen in this country. And it's frustrating.
Well, also leading up to the pardons, you had Republicans insisting that the president wasn't going to issue the pardons.
Of course.
And then he does it, and then it's either the pardon power is the president's power. I mean, that's the way they talk about it. Not just with that, but with the guy from Honduras or Nicaragua.
Yeah, the Honduran president.
Yeah, it's the president's pardon power, and therefore they don't even have to opine on it. But it's Eventually, he personally will leave our politics.
I can't imagine that, but yeah.
And actually, just a few years from now, this is his last term in the presidency. But he does all of these things. They're not really strategic. I mean, I don't think he has gained political advantage by issuing those pardons. It's part of, trying to, I think he, on some level, believes the 2020 election was stolen from him, even if he doesn't believe the specific lies he tells about, they didn't count the votes in Atlanta or whatever. He believes that was rightfully his and it was taken away from him. And he cares about building that narrative about how he was in the right. And part of that is insisting that, in fact, the rioters were the good guys there trying to, undo the stealing of the election. And so it's about his personal ego, but it's not advantaging him politically. It's not advantaging the Republican Party politically to do this.
No, it just makes the country worse.
Yes.
Yeah, and the thing you wonder is that,
but the next guy probably won't do exactly these kinds of things.
But that's the question. I mean, and I'm interested in what you think of this. When you go from Eisenhower to Kennedy or Nixon to Ford, even Carter to, Clinton or something from the same party, you can change pretty quickly. And the politics can change, particularly Clinton from Carter. I wonder where you think of how much this is going to stain Republican politics after Trump is off of the scene, because one of the things that I keep noticing is that people saying, oh, fuck, we can get away with this. I didn't think we could get away with this. I can't believe you can do that thing. That's the Shane Gillis joke when he talking about the debate, when he's like, Ted Cruz's wife is ugly. And they're like, oh, I didn't know you could say that in this. And it's kind of like, I don't, like, if the Venezuela thing comes off where you still have this hideous dictatorship in there, but we get some sort of oil concessions out of it, or Greenland happens with no major repercussions, the Iran bombing happens with no major repercussions. Like, what does that do to the Republican Party, emboldening a lot of its worst instincts because you can get away with it?
Well, so I think two things about that. One is, some of the things that you can get away with, there's still a question of why you even want to.
Well, that's a very good question.
Right.
Yeah.
And so some of these things that I just think, the next Republican president is not going to find it useful, probably, to try to, pardon a bunch of people who engaged in a riot or, various fraud schemes or that sort of thing. But the other thing is, the Republican Party has paid a real political price for this. There are huge swaths of the country, especially upscale suburbs, where they, are just getting way fewer votes than they got back in like 2012 from exactly the kind of voters who care about quote unquote norms and who care about exactly this sort of stuff. They find Trump's behavior disgusting. They are really unnerved by the undermining of the rule of law, and it has pushed them toward the Democratic Party. The thing is that at the same time that happened, Trump made other changes to the party that were very attractive to other groups of voters. And I don't think it was this. I don't think that he, picked up votes in rural Iowa because people wanted a riot in the Capitol. I think he picked up votes in rural Iowa because he abandoned unpopular Republican Party positions on Social Security and Medicare.
So it's the populist stuff.
And then there are other areas like gay marriage and even to some extent abortion, where he has moderated the Republican Party in a way that is electorally advantageous. And I think on both sides, people sort of they misapply those things. They think that Trump is winning because of his disgusting behavior, when often, in fact, he's winning in spite of it, and because he is making smart political choices that he's been able to force on his party. I mean, Democrats wish that, or at least moderate Democrats like me wish that we could have a leader who could, go to powerful interest groups in our party in the way that the anti-abortion lobby is powerful in the Republican Party, and just tell them to shut up. I mean, Trump has not lifted one finger to use HHS to try to restrict access to abortion since he has become president again. His view is, I got you Roe versus Wade overturned. I did my part. Now I owe you nothing more.
Including this week about the Hyde Amendment, right? Like, he was telling people to get over it.
Yeah, I mean,
remember, it was the first thing. It was one of the first things that George W. Bush did was access to abortions abroad,
right?
Paid for. That was like literally day 1 or 2 in 2000. Yeah.
But I mean, and there are a lot of pro-lifers who really expected that, the Trump FDA would try to take abortion pills off the market. And it's clear that Trump thinks that's a political loser. He doesn't want to do it. And he has enough control over the party that he can just not do it. And the anti-abortion groups don't even complain that much.
I'm curious about one thing that I saw a bunch yesterday, which is clips of Republicans who are still in our politics, still very prominent, people like Marco Rubio, who is now maybe Trump's most trusted person in the White House. Certainly like exceptionally powerful.
Yeah.
But the speech he gave on January 7th, 2021, just eviscerating the people who were involved with the events of January 6th was astonishing, given the current context.
Yeah.
Like, it is very hard to imagine someone making that sort of change. And you talked about Trump fading from our politics. That's very much true.
Yeah.
But the two people who we often talk about when it's like, well, who's next for the Republicans, J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio, what does all of this mean with respect to who the hell Marco Rubio is? How do you make sense out of his perhaps his character, but certainly his kind of ideological valence, given what we've seen from him, just the remarkable change that's taken place there? And I suppose this is even a bridge to some of the recent news with respect to Venezuela, since he's very much regarded as kind of the architect of what's taking place there.
I mean, I think a lot of people get ahead in Washington because they have no real core and are able to, conform themselves to whatever is politically advantageous within a party at a time. And I think Marco Rubio has changed because the changing is the way that he can gain power in Washington. The other thing I think about, the way that people talked about January 6th and the immediate aftermath versus 5 years from now is that these sorts of traumatic events always feel very different in the moment from how they do afterward. I mean, I think when Charlie Kirk was assassinated a few months ago, there was this pervasive sense among both conservatives and liberals that he was going to be stronger in death than he was in life, and that he was martyred in this almost Jesus-like way that was going to cause him, was going to have tremendous political influence going forward. And that's clearly not true, even just a few months out. He's obviously less relevant dead than he was alive. And so I think, there are ways people feel, right after we've gone through, some horrific, violent event, that it feels like everything has changed and we're going to be focused on this forever. And for better or for worse, people often find ways to get past that. And I think that's what a lot of Republicans have done about January 6th. It felt horrifying in the time. Now it's politically inconvenient to talk about how horrifying it was. And there's been some there's been time that's passed, and they're able to basically just memory hole it.
And you can give a speech on January 7th. I don't have in front of me how Marco Rubio voted during the second impeachment, but I'm going to guess that he voted not to impeach, and that was the time. To figure it out. Like, what are you gonna? How much does your disgust at this stretch into what you think should be done at this moment?
And the way they justified it at the time was, it was like, well, Donald Trump's political career is over. Why do we need to impeach him?
And you see that constantly. A lot of the reaction, I think Scott Jennings, he might have been on with you. I remember last night, or someone was on this was adjudicated at the ballot box last November. So why are we still talking about it?
I mean, isn't there a case to be made for people who have a core set of beliefs but no principles? Like a Marco Rubio. I mean, the sense, having him there as a kind of liar about January 6th and things like that is much better than having so many of these people that are MAGA true believers that are the ones that this website is for. The ones in the coalition that you've met them. This is what CPAC is now. I mean, people can't imagine. I mean, I remember when I went and covered CPAC and the remnants of the John Birch Society was there, and it was hugely controversial.
I mean, Ron Paul or Rand Paul would win the straw poll every year.
Yeah, every year, and it was like, but there was kind of normal, and now it's just this Star Wars bar of people who love stuff like this about January 6th. And it isn't. I mean, there's a case to be made that it's better than there's somebody who's full of shit, but he has some core principles, as you see in how he's taking the lead on this. And I'll tell you what I was thinking about this morning is that if this goes tits up.
This being Venezuela. Yeah.
And Iran goes tits up. And Israel doesn't stay, we get another October 7th. That is an incredible opening for J.D. Vance, right? And if it remains okay, we got it, and it was wrong, it's not legal, and what the hell are they after anyway? But it's kind of status quo as like it is today. That's a thing that J.D. Vance is going to have to deal with. Whereas if all these are disasters, it becomes Iraq 2.0, and they keep mentioning it. But he seems kind of sidelined because of somebody like Marco Rubio, which I appreciate him there when it comes to all of these scumbags. He's better than all of these scumbags.
But we had those conversations during the first Trump administration as well, right? Like there's...
But this is 1,000 times worse.
People friendly probably to all of us who were working for Mike Pence at the time and in various other places. And it was better to have Ajit Pai as FCC chair than it is Brendan Carr by a lot.
Yes.
But also most of the people in the process of being there, and Ajit Pai is, I think, an exception to this rule, they kind of permanently sully themselves. I mean, Lindsey Graham's just popping up. Lindsey Graham yesterday, it's Donald Trump's the best president in the history of America kind of thing. He's finally,
don't do that. That's different.
But like when at some point your lack of principle, like if we're going to rebuild some place over this crazy detour over this past 10 years, and it's a bipartisan detour and whole of society detour, I think, there has to be some amount of kind of civic and intellectual self-respect. Marco Rubio doesn't have it. I might be kind of glad that he's in charge of the Caribbean, but then again, I'm not a neoconservative. I don't like unilateral wars. Right. I think as much as I really am happy to see asshole and wife of asshole in a jail somewhere and not in power, and that our friends are feeling—
Say that with a Spanish accent.
Asshole.
Wife of asshole.
But in my opinion, we shouldn't just go and snatch out and kidnap a foreign leader and take him to your prison, even if you get to kill a lot of Cubans.
In Latin America.
Of course it is.
Did you see these polls?
Oh, I'm
And
sure.
there was not a single country where the majority of people oppose this. The highest, the closest you get, which is understandable, is Mexico.
Colombia was into it.
Like Colombia,
huge,
very into it. Number one. Costa Rica, number one with a bullet. 80% were like,
Costa Rica,
we're happy about it.
Costa Rica's a colony at this
They've all been pretty profoundly impacted by the dysfunction in Venezuela. So I imagine that helps to create
including you're getting
sentiment.
real anti-immigrant politics in a lot of these countries because of the
Hugely.
refugee flows from Venezuela.
Hugely.
I am curious about one thing that came up yesterday. You mentioned I did Abby Phillips' show last night, and I was a bit surprised by the January 6th segment, which was the last serious segment of the show. We did a thing where I talked about why Marvin Gaye's album.
Dad Was Right?
No, not his dad was right, but why one of his
Hear My
albums
Dear.
is great. Not Hear My Dear, which is also a great album and underappreciated.
I think you'd be more horrified by that joke, by the way, but go ahead.
No. Well, I'm sitting next to you, and I've been doing it for almost a decade now.
Build up antibodies.
But with respect to January 6th, one of the points that we talked about in the commercial break, not during the segment, which people should go find it. Abby is not really a killer in contexts like that, but she was, oof. At any rate, that's not. I'm not dissing her there, but January 6th, in the commercial break, we talked a little bit about something that we've raised a few times on the podcast and the context leading up to it. Like that summer of 2020, absolutely insane. Even into the fall, like we were still dealing with tremendous civic unrest, all sorts of insanity. If we're talking about political violence and kind of the apogee of all of that craziness, maybe that period was it. And we talk about January 6th today. And we still talk about it. People are deeply affected by it, and it's understandable. You use the phrase memory hold. We totally memory hold the anarchy and chaos and literal anarchy, like the fact that certain enclaves of American cities became ungovernable, literally. They seceded from the Union temporarily. That was pretty insane. We don't really talk about it. And one of the thoughts that I've had for a very long time is that had we had a truly bipartisan reckoning with the events of January 6th after it occurred, and perhaps done that in partnership with, not to overshadow, but because they are really of a piece with the craziness of what happened in the months that preceded it, maybe we would be in a slightly better place here as a polity. I don't really know. Maybe I'm an optimist in that regard, but certainly at like the 5th year anniversary, this feels like the last time I can mention it with anyone even having a chance of taking the suggestion seriously. But perhaps we're even beyond that.
Well, I think it was impossible because the Republican voter base was too attached to Donald Trump. There's no way to have a reckoning about January 6th that allows him to be rehabilitated, and they insisted on rehabilitating.
But if the ask was, look, we've had a tremendous surge in political violence. Right. We don't trust one another. Like we have to get together and have a conversation about what happened. Let's investigate this. Let's analyze it. Not so much to do placement of blame, but to meaningfully understand it and try to build some sort of bridges at that stage.
I mean, the question is, who's the us in let's?
Yeah.
Like, can we do that right now in our two-party politics? I don't think we can.
I mean,
but
we
at
haven't
that
been
time, Marco Rubio, who was going to give that speech on the 7th, even the Republicans who were perhaps not interested in impeachment would have certainly been interested, I think, in a conversation about the broader dysfunction.
That was basically over in 2 weeks. It was just, similarly to the much less consequential grab 'em by the pussy Billy Bush tape from 2016, which I think was in October. We forget it now, but 10 Republican senators unendorsed Donald Trump And it was like that was the biggest thing that almost got him.
Mike Lee came out against him.
Mike Lee was Mike Lee was
based Mike Lee.
Based Mike Lee, who played a really negative, shitty role in January 6th. Like if it had gone according to Trump's plan, Mike Lee would have done some really bad stuff on January 6th and wasn't allowed to, and he's just acted like a clown ever since. But that period of time just didn't last. It was like in the moment people felt like this, and then quietly. In the case of January 6th, it was just like 2 or 3 weeks later. In the case of the Billy Bush tape, it was a couple of months. But like you look around, it's like, okay, we still have these two parties. They still have these voters. They're still going to do this. And if I'm going to do business, then this is the price of doing business. Donald Trump has made it the price of doing business that you can't have stuck your neck out too far criticizing him and what he did with the election denial and with January 6th. You can have made a speech, but you better not vote for impeachment. I don't think there's a single is there a single person who voted for impeachment who's Republican who just didn't get absolutely kneecapped within an inch of his life? I don't think so. Right?
Let me text Peter.
It's just like David
hair down to here.
Yeah.
There's the one congressman from the Central Valley of California where Trump has been convinced that David Valadao is the only Republican who can win that district, and so he gets a free pass for having voted to impeach Donald Trump. He tried to get every other Republican defeated in a primary and succeeded on a number of them, but they've persuaded him to hold off on that one.
Although he's not going to get Massey, I don't think. I think Massey's going to win his primary this time.
The thing that I find even weirder that we haven't been able to have a reckoning about is, even as prominent politicians themselves have been victims of this violence, they still haven't, there still hasn't been some, national bipartisan reckoning around this. I mean, Donald Trump was shot. You had the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Minnesota who was murdered. Josh Shapiro's house was set on fire.
The congressional baseball field
right,
shot up before.
Their lives are literally at risk. And it's still, I think that there is some, quieter bipartisan cooperation around like nuts and bolts security stuff. But in terms of like a national conversation, you don't get it. And I think part of the reason you don't get it is like, what exactly would the output be? I don't know that we would, we'd get together and we'd find where the violence is coming from and stop it.
I mean, there's only one version of that that has ever really happened in history in a voluntary way, which is why we always talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa.
Right.
Nuremberg doesn't count. Right? Arresting people and hanging them doesn't count. But I mean, I don't know what that looks like. I mean, there's so many periods in American history. I tomorrow night on Thursday night there'll be a interview that I did with Bill de Blasio, and we ended up talking because of Venezuela about his support of the Sandinistas. The thing about that is funny. It's like, do we want to even talk about that? Because nobody remembers it. Like nobody. I mean, Bruce Springsteen was doing fundraising concerts for the Christic Institute.
Jesus Christ.
Jackson Brown, they were doing huge thing for Sandinista stuff all the time. They were doing films about it, Hollywood films about it. Totally forgotten about it. I mean, Vietnam's kind of the same way. Iraq is the same way. Iraq is not a real thing anymore. It's a cudgel for Republicans to beat other Republicans with. It's like, I watched a clip of this latest episode of Tucker Carlson's show, and it's all about neocons and Iraq, and it's so kind of disembodied from what happened.
Did he at least work in a Globo Homo?
No, he did say favorite. Maria Corina Machado, the pro-gay marriage lady. Which was like, and then he said,
No, he's just defining
he's sticking up for Maduro because Maduro is at least trying to stop gay marriage.
He's floated the theory that was part of the reason.
Not floated, he said it. And it wasn't like, well, I don't know. He was like, he is in Brooklyn detention because he hates Paul Singer and the neocons and the homosexuals. It is the wildest thing because he also then says the next thing, which is when you know that somebody needs to be in a padded cell. He says, a friend of Klaus Schwab. Do you know Klaus Schwab? Right, this is the World Economic Forum. This is like a big Alex Jonesy kind of thing. But no, there's no reckonings. I mean, there was Brian Burrows' book on terrorism.
Days of Rage. Yeah.
Days of Rage. Everybody who I know who's read that book is shocked when you get to the line that there was like 600 bombings a year in New York City. From like Puerto Rican separatists and things. No, we as a culture, we love forgetting things, and sometimes that's really good. And there's sometimes when it's really bad. I mean, it was very, very good for the Germans to be reminded of things all the time, because as any Jewish person knows, they go to Germany, they're like, would you like my house? I will give it to you. Because they needed to be. But as far as like memory of 2020, we also, it's a chronology thing, because COVID happens, we haven't had any reckoning with COVID policy.
This is true.
Was it good to close schools? Did we need masks? Were they effective?
The reckoning will be the people who either closed the schools or sort of assented to their closure will say, "Oh, I always opposed that."
Yeah,
that's the reckoning, and like, why are you making such? It's been
but
5 years.
You'll never have a reckoning when people are going to look bad.
No one wants to think about that time. It was unpleasant.
Yeah, it was
that's true.
Yeah.
And then the other funny thing, like some things are actually getting a lot better again. Yeah. Like, violent crime is falling a lot for reasons that I don't think anybody knows exactly why. But a lot of cities are having their lowest murder total in decades. Yeah. On the other hand, it still looks like there's serious damage in educational outcomes that we're not figuring out how to fix. So it's a mixed bag there. But I think some of it is just people they want to move on, and they can look at least at certain parts of it where we really have healed. And so why dwell?
Can I ask a question about journalism and the kind of media coverage that we've been seeing? I'm specifically struck by kind of the tenor of the conversation around Venezuela and even the Greenland conversation. In both instances, if this were happening in 2017, I would expect a kind of fever-pitched, this is not normal, like that sort of surrounding context. And I was struck.
Do you remember the protests at the airports in 2017?
Yeah.
I mean, that was like, don't take Lyft. No, don't take Uber, take Lyft, because there was some connection to the Uber CEO, and it was wild. But it's totally different now.
Yeah, it's just really different. I'm going to name a name, and I'm not singling him out because of anything in particular. It just comes to mind. But like, I'm remembering seeing Jim Acosta have these showdowns with the president, and it this kind of performative, like, I'm barking at you, you're going to be seeing this clip for a while.
When he was doing it was like professional wrestling.
But there have been no scenes like that with respect to the Venezuela stuff, and there are
Kmele
serious
kicked them out of
questions.
There's actually been some pretty good press conferences.
And great questions that get asked.
Not by the new Pentagon press corps.
No,
not
that's
by the
not who I'm
skin
referring
suit
to.
press corps. No, it's by actual journalists.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. People are tired.
Yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is that like Democrats are, they're still engaged in the sense that they're coming out to vote, and substantially larger numbers than Republicans. You still in special elections see that Democrats care more, they're showing up more, they're voting, but they do seem exhausted in terms of the protest stuff.
Yeah,
and I think some of it is that some of that was theater that was not actually useful. Like, I don't think Jim Acosta accomplished anything through those, scenes that he created on
Pussy
on
Hats.
CNN.
I don't think that was anything but a good punchline in like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. I don't think it accomplished anything, no.
But I think, some of the organizing movements probably were useful in terms of, moving toward electoral outcomes. I don't know whether the baby's been thrown out with the bathwater here, but I think that Democrats, they still hate Donald Trump with the fire of 1,000 suns. They're still very angry about what's happening, and they're still voting on that basis, but they're, maybe not posting about it as much on Facebook.
But is that, as a Democrat, I mean, say you're a moderate Democrat, is that the Democratic strategy? Of course, everyone has been saying this since Joe Biden's loss, that there's no affirmative message from Democrats. They have not come out. But it seems to me that the strategy that might even be working is just back off. People will vote against him. There's only one other option. Let them destroy themselves. We don't have to put a message out here.
Right.
And I think if that's their strategy, so far it seems to be effective.
Yeah. You don't need an affirmative message to win a midterm election against an unpopular president. I worry about 2028. And what the party is going to stand for, but I don't think that's a problem in 2026.
You don't think President Mamdani is a bad idea? I don't understand. No, when we were here a year ago, we were kind of talking about the vibe shift. Like, where does that go with policy? What's exciting Democrats right now? And is there anything else that has excited at least discussion among, I guess, the abundance bro agenda, which I'll associate with you, even though you're not necessarily in the center of it, but you're a centrist, gets a lot of discussion among the chattering class, much more, I think, than it like exists as a bunch of policies that politicians are enacting. But maybe you can correct my impression of that. But it's Mamdani. Like, that's the story that people are excited about.
Grassroots enthusiasm is there.
And he's got, he's appointing people who 5 years ago, 6 years ago, were like, want to collectivize shit because of...
Still bad, bud. 5 years ago, it's still bad.
Owning houses is racist.
I mean, the warmth of collectivism was in his goddamn speech.
Was that a troll? Was that, like, you see, deliberately trolling?
I mean, he's writing that speech.
He says that?
He's just as he
believes it,
just as he wrote in his acceptance speech on election night that, there's no problem too small that government won't be there to fix for you, or too big that they can't solve. I mean, that is a written. You quote Eugene Debs in your first sentence for a reason. You
Literally the first sentence.
You get Bernie Sanders to swear you in for a reason. He wants to play this role. Yes, it is a troll because.
And by the way, the Eugene Debs thing, you could quote him in a positive way because he was unfairly persecuted by the government, but not. He was like, his economic program was really something. That's a different vibe there.
But like, so you've written about Mamdani recently.
Yeah.
How is he thrilling your centrist heart?
I mean, he wasn't my first choice.
Yeah.
Was he your second choice?
No. But
Okay. All right.
it's not clear to me that he's
Shall we
worse
keep
than.
going? Yeah.
It's not clear to me he's worse than Andrew Cuomo, who was awful in his own list of ways. And in fact, a lot of when people talk about they're concerned about the direction Mamdani is going to take the city, often they're talking about things Andrew Cuomo did when he was governor. Andrew Cuomo signed the rent control law that is pushing apartment buildings in New York City into insolvency.
Can you either now or in 10 seconds talk about that law specifically? Because it's under
So, I mean, New York has
discussion.
had rent control for decades, going back to the end of World War II. But generally, the way things worked was that, if you were in an apartment, there was a limit on how the rent could be raised. And if you moved out of the apartment, the landlord had an ability to raise the rent effectively close to
Which
market
is, for
rent.
people who aren't familiar,
if it was
stabilization.
old enough, right?
And it's stabilization versus rent control, right?
Right. Yes. But and this is the way rent control works in most cities, in Los Angeles and other places. There's it's for the tenant who's in the apartment, but when the apartment comes back to market, it goes towards something that looks like a market rent. And they just changed the rule where they said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. When the apartment comes vacant, you have to put a new tenant in at basically the same rent, and you're barely allowed to recoup anything for the fact that you have gutted and renovated the apartment and brought it back to building code and that sort of thing. And then at the same time, there's a body called the Rent Guidelines Board that says how much the rent can rise every year on rent-controlled apartments. And for some of Bill de Blasio's years, they did 0. But in recent years, they've done numbers that are positive. But remember, we had 8% inflation in some of these years. They keep putting a number that is lower than inflation. Yeah. And so you have these buildings where the operating cost goes up, the rents don't go up as much as the operating costs, and you don't have this benefit of being able to at least turn the units and get new people in at higher rents.
And tariffs that make construction materials more expensive, et cetera. There's a lot
Exactly.
of stuff, yeah.
So, something like 10% of regulated apartment buildings, so about half the apartments in New York are regulated in one way or another, and a majority of the buildings have regulated apartments in them. About 10% of those buildings are now cash flow negative, which is to say that the rent roll does not even cover the cost to operate and maintain the building. That's before you have to pay a mortgage. That's before you have to provide any sort of return to the equity holder. Those buildings are effectively financially valueless. Like you can't operate them at a profit even with no debt on them.
And many of those are small and immigrant business holders who own like a duplex or a couple of duplexes.
Generally, these rules only apply to buildings with at least 4 units in them. Okay. So it's not the very smallest buildings, but yes, it's some mom and pop landlords. But it's also, there's a company called Pinnacle that went bankrupt that owns thousands of units, including many buildings that are like this. And now the city's trying to intervene in that bankruptcy and saying, that there's a buyer who's willing to pay $80,000 an apartment for the Pinnacle portfolio. So first of all, think about that. You have all these apartment buildings in New York.
Wow.
The purported value of the buildings is $80,000 per apartment. And the official position of the city is that's too high. There's no way that you will, in fact, operate these as a successful business having paid that much because the rents that they're allowed to charge on them are so low.
Because of their policy.
Right, exactly. That's literally what the city says in its own filing.
Yeah.
And this is and they're quite possibly right about that. These are such a bad business that it's possible that the new buyer will come in and that buyer will go bankrupt again in 2 years. But what the city is trying to do here, and what some of Mamdani's advisors want to do, is they acknowledge that some landlords have been made insolvent. They also correctly note that there are other buildings like in desirable areas in Manhattan that have a mix of regulated and unregulated apartments that are not anywhere close to insolvency. And it is in fact true that you can regulate down the rents on the rent-controlled units. And because there are market units, you're basically just taking money from the landlord. Nobody's going to go bankrupt.
And so people understand this. When you are, building a new, skyscraper or sort of apartment building, it's often the case that you have to negotiate with the city certain number of units that are available to people in certain income brackets. I mean, you're not building a building and it's just like, let's charge whatever, because that's a sense that people have. Oh, the rents are so high in New York developers build these things. This is very complicated, and I don't understand. And maybe you could speak to this. If some of these things are going insolvent, we're not seeing empty buildings all around the city. So people must be able to come in and think they can make money off these. Well, how are there not a whole bunch of empty skyscrapers or buildings in general?
So first of all, there are a substantial number of empty apartments. There's something like 50,000 rent-regulated apartments that basically they've become vacant. They're in terrible condition because some person has been in there for decades, and it would cost maybe $100,000 to bring the apartment up to code, but you're barely allowed to raise the rent if you do that, and so the landlord decides it's better to leave the apartment vacant than to try to rent it out again. So there is that vacancy, but then you do have these buildings like you described there. Typically, it's 20% of the units in those buildings are 20%. Regulated. So the landlord can take the hit on the fact that they're getting less rent off that because they have 80% of the units are market. You also have older buildings where the rent control rules have changed a lot over the years, and there was a period where you were able to deregulate a substantial number of units, especially in desirable neighborhoods. So you have a lot of old buildings where it used to be entirely regulated, but now 60% of the units are market rate. And a lot of those buildings are also still financially healthy. But then you have, especially in the Bronx and generally in lower income neighborhoods in the city where nothing got deregulated, the rents are very low. And operating costs are still, on average about $1,100 per apartment per month in the city. So that's, just to, heat the building, provide water, et cetera. That's the amount of rent that you have to collect from every unit just to keep the lights on. And a lot of these regulated rents
and again, that's
are
not
lower
mortgage
than that.
or anything like
right,
that.
Exactly.
If you have a mortgage on it.
But so, what people like, this woman, Sia Weaver, who's been in the news
She's
for...
great. I love her. I'm really inspired by her. Yeah.
What they say is, some of these buildings are insolvent, and what we should do is buy them very cheaply. The government should buy them and then operate them as public housing. And so the first thing that happens if you do that is they don't have to pay property tax anymore because they're owned by the government. So it looks like, the building has its finances have become better, but really it's, that's just the government taking money from itself.
Right.
And then, over time, if you continue, as Mamdani says, he's going to, freeze rents and it's going to be a 0% increase for years, the finances of those buildings will just get worse and worse over time. There'll be more that are insolvent. And if the city takes them on, those become a liability that ultimately is borne by taxpayers. These buildings are going to be cash flow negative. And much as we do with, something like 400,000 units of public housing in the city.
But that's not unappealing to these people. I mean, you see this woman, whatever her name is, in these videos of her being a crank and a crackpot and saying paying rent is white supremacy or something.
Owning homes.
No, homeownership.
Homeownership. Yeah. No, paying rent is slavery, which we're against. But that seems like for them, this is a perfect scenario for this kind of utopian, dopey mindset that doesn't understand economics, is that the more that this happens, the more that the government can gobble up. And that to them, if it was 90% owned by the government, that'd be a perfect world, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what they think. Now, in practice, I mean, we know what it looks like for the city to own and operate apartments, again, because of NYCHA. And there's something like an $80 billion maintenance backlog in NYCHA. The buildings are in awful shape. And it's because the rents on them are very low and the buildings are cash flow negative. And so if the city, you can... I don't know that it's the system that we should have. Singapore has a system where most of the real estate development is done by the government. People live in public housing and it works, and the buildings are reasonably nice.
Singapore is weird.
First of all, Singapore is weird. And second of all, those buildings are mixed income, and you have lots of people who have substantial ability to pay in those buildings so they can collect enough revenue to operate them. If the city is just picking up the worst real estate in the city, the most financially distressed real estate in the city, then that's just going to be a huge maw for taxpayer dollars that gets in the way of, for example, trying to have a universal childcare program, which Mamdani says he wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, I won't divert on this at all, just people can look this up, is that there's often the reference, because they're democratic socialists, of course, which, by the way, is understanding that socialism is not democratic, that you have to put that, it's like, we're democratic types, the other ones are bad, is that they always point to Sweden, Denmark, et cetera, as somebody who owned an apartment in Stockholm and had a second-hand contract, as they're called in Sweden. Look at what this type of scenario has done to the rental market in Sweden. It is insane. I mean, you get on a list for a public apartment. I think it's 22 years long.
Oh, God. Jeez.
And just look at that. I mean, you talk about Sweden and say, oh, that's the one that works. Well, I'll give you one thing that definitely doesn't work. It's rent control in the city of Stockholm. It's absolutely insane, and that's kind of what they're always talking about, something similar. So.
Is there a place where because you talk very fast and smart about this stuff, and are still a Democrat, and and there's more talk about you see more YIMBYism in the Democratic conversation.
Yes.
Is there a place where that's being translated into policy that we can feel like at least momentarily positive towards about the trend, at least?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, in California, the state legislature has passed a series of increasingly aggressive laws that basically preempt local zoning and force cities to allow more kinds of development. And it's been iterative. They've been learning what works and what doesn't, what the cities find loopholes around. They've also been having negotiations, especially with the construction trade unions, where the Democratic officials have gotten smarter over time. Very often what they'll say is, great, let's have this rule, we're going to upzone stuff, we're going to legalize apartment buildings. Everything has to be done with union labor. Mm-hmm. And then what ends up happening is these projects that, the very largest projects are usually union anyway, and so that doesn't impose a lot of cost. But these mid-sized projects just become drastically more expensive if you impose that rule. And as a result, people don't take advantage of the new zoning. And so in California, they tried that, they saw that happen, they came back and they cut better deals that actually make more of the things financially viable.
And labor unions being big donors to Democratic campaigns.
Right. And there's also, there's been a little bit of some schism in this. The carpenters are sort of more YIMBY than some of the other trades. I don't know exactly why this is, but the carpenters unions seem to have a view that more construction is broadly good for them, whereas the other trades, their view is we just want rules that everything has to be done through us. Here in New York, we've had significant upzoning. The Eric Adams City of Yes initiative, I think, will cause some more real estate development here.
I feel like you need to sell it like Eric Adams would.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can wake up and there's 9/11. What a city. Yeah.
But, on his way out the door,
he said live from Istanbul.
Our city council is always trying to come up with ways to make everything more expensive and more difficult to do here in the city.
Yeah.
And so at the 11th hour in the Adams administration, the city council passed a law that will impose these, union labor requirements on city subsidized affordable housing developments. We have we have a department in the city that works with private developers that gives them subsidies in exchange for building buildings where they agree to cap the rents. Mm-hmm. And those, you're going to have to pay everyone at least $40 an hour in wages and benefits on those projects now. It's going to almost double the cost to the city to cause a subsidized apartment
But
building.
Josh, is there a tipping point? Because I hear people when a percentage or two wealth tax on people, they can absorb it. But all of this stuff, the accumulation of it, the argument is essentially, and so far it seems to have been right, is that New York is so fucking awesome that no one's going to leave regardless. Yeah. Is there a tipping point where you start seeing people fleeing the city, either wealth fleeing the city, people not building anymore? We're seeing that, of course, that it's very, very hard to build here. Why do it when there's other markets you could do it in? Yeah. But are we at any tipping point, or do you actually foresee one in any way?
I don't think so. I don't think we see that in the real estate market.
Yeah,
people still want fancy apartments
exactly.
here. And then the other thing is the city is getting safer.
Yeah.
At least for now.
Because it's getting richer. Right?
Well, I don't think we know exactly why the murder rate is
It's got to be one of the things, right? You see a lot of murders in Park Slope.
Right? I don't know. There wasn't a murder spike after the financial crisis. It's people on the far left who basically say, crime happens because of poverty. I don't think we necessarily see that in the data. But in any case,
but there's a lot of people like I live in Bed-Stuy, 15 years ago. Bed-Stuy versus now, which everybody has a fucking degree from Bryn Mawr,
right? And
is like sitting drinking cortados. That seems to have an effect on the way the neighborhood is from even when you live there, because you live there too. Yeah. And like the influx of wealth being a just more expensive city to live in, got to have some effect, right?
Right. Maybe, but the other thing is that when we went through this period in the 70s and 80s in New York with the real urban decline, some of that had to do with the city's fiscal crisis and the very high taxes that were imposed for declining quality services. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was a huge increase in crime in the city, and people didn't want to live here, they didn't want to work here. The city became, very focused on finding ways, how do we get people to invest in real estate? How do we get people to build things in the city again? They relaxed some of the rent control rules. They, created programs that created tax incentives to do new building.
They also improved the schools and allowed for a lot of charter schools to come in so that families wouldn't skedaddle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The city doesn't have all those same problems now. It has, the high cost of doing business and the high taxes, but the quality of life here is much better than it was in 1980. Yeah, for sure. And I think that to a significant extent insulates policymakers from having to, make a pitch for a better New York.
Matt, the question you asked though, before we got deep into housing was around where is the energy in the party right now? And I don't know if we kind of arrived at a place with respect to an answer to that. And specifically with New York, I think what makes Mamdani so interesting is when he ran, there was this sense of, a very clear sense that this is a very progressive politics. Since then, despite the appointments and the conversation we've had, there's also this sense that, well, he's kind of moderating a bit.
Yeah. Well, he has moderated on certain issues. He reappointed a police commissioner who's a very establishment figure. Yeah. His new schools chancellor is moving forward with the curriculum reforms that Eric Adams was doing that I think are broadly good.
Keeping mayoral control.
He's keeping mayoral control. On real estate, there's this weird thing that's happened on the far left, where if you ask Mamdani what he's changed his opinion on over the years, the first thing he says is real estate, that he understands the importance of private capital for creating new housing. They really think very differently about developers and landlords. They've come to understand that, you need to partner with private developers. You need to create incentives for them to want to build in the city. They're sensitive to cost, and so you need to worry about whether the things you're doing are making it too expensive to build. They get that. They get that much more than they did a few years ago. But they think landlords are useless parasites who you can expropriate with no economic consequence, other than the fact that the landlords will have less money.
So they're Leninists, yeah. That's that, and that one strand is...
Right. And the problem is that, once a developer has completed a building and people have moved into it, then the developer is the landlord. And even if the developer intends to sell to someone who's primarily in the landlording business, the only reason the development works is because there's an expectation that once the building is completed, you'll be able to collect rent on it, and the finances will pencil. And so I don't think that they've quite made that connection. And part of the reason for that is it is true that you can treat new buildings differently from old buildings. There are cities that they've imposed rent control and said, well, it's only on the old buildings and we're not going to do it on the new buildings. And that has more or less worked over the decades in New York. Of all the reasons that it's hard to build an apartment building in New York, I don't think it's, at least until very recently, been the case that developers are afraid that they're about to impose a new rent control on the new building that they're built. That's, zoning and, high cost of labor and things like that. So it is true that you can have an approach that tries to screw the old capital while attracting the new capital. And real estate can't move in the way that like the headquarters of ExxonMobil can move. So you can have stranded capital in New York and take value from it and get away with that in a way that you can't with other businesses. The problem, though, is that their approach is so broad spectrum confiscatory around the existing landlords, where it's not just like the rent control of the 1970s that reduced the value of the buildings. They're really pushing the value of a lot of these buildings down to zero. They've passed a mild but comprehensive statewide form of rent control called good cause eviction that imposes some sort of restrictions even on newer units. And you have people like C.O. Weaver, the mayor's tenant protection person, who talks openly about she'd really like to bring newer buildings under rent control. So I do think at some point you get to a point where you can say to developers, here's a tax abatement, here's an upzoning, here are things, we really want you to build this new building, where they might just be afraid that the policy environment is uncertain and that they'll be expropriated later. If you, really try to go full communism on the old buildings that are there, it can make it hard to be a capitalist for new development. But that is what they're trying to do. They understand that they need to get the private sector to build new buildings, and they think they can.
This woman, who is not an economist, but I think has a degree in puppet theater.
Yeah.
But she was,
Smith College or something.
We've all seen her tweets about, home ownership is white supremacy. But last month, while the city council was debating, should we impose a bunch of new, more costly affordable housing requirements, she was lobbying the council against that and saying the things that you say when you have read an Econ 101 textbook. That if you impose this new rule that more of the apartments have to be deeply affordable, the city will not get as many apartments built, and therefore please don't do that. So
I was surprised to see that in your piece.
Yeah.
I mean, so who wins ultimately? Where's the Democratic Party going to the extent that New York mayoral race was actually some kind of a bellwether with respect to where left of center politics are right now?
I mean, the funny thing with it is that everyone wants to talk about affordability now. And part of the
not
reason,
everybody. Well, it's a Democrat plot. It's not. It's made up. It doesn't matter.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, but part of the reason that affordability is an attractive message is that you can say it from anywhere on the political spectrum. You can tell a story about why your agenda is going to make things more affordable. So I think Mamdani gets that people are upset about the price level, and a rent freeze will cause various problems, but it will in fact cause a lot of people to not have their rent go up next year. And so I think he'll be rewarded for that to some extent. But I do worry that they are not going to thread this needle that they're trying to do, where they're going to say we're going to be capitalist on the new construction and not on the old construction. In particular, because Mamdani is very wedded to the idea that things should be done with union labor, and I think just hasn't done the math on how many projects that's going to make unworkable in New York. I'm more hopeful about other parts of the country, in part because you've had an effective bipartisan politics in California. Obviously, it's a heavily Democratic state, but the bills that the legislature has passed have relied on Republican votes because the Democratic Party is split on these issues. In the Northeast, the Republicans are just awful on this stuff. They are not truly free market. We have a guy who's going to be the Republican nominee for governor who's lined up with the Transit Workers Union saying we should have a law requiring every subway train to have 2 workers on it. Like it's 1910.
Yeah. Why not 3?
Yeah, why not 3? So, I think
same number of crazy people on every train. Just imagine for every insane person. There'll be 7 people a train. Yeah.
But people get mad when you do these things where you're going to say we're going to force you to allow new things to be built in your neighborhood. A lot of people don't like that. It's easier to do when you have the political cover of people in both parties doing it, and Republicans have just provided absolutely none of that in the Northeast. In Connecticut, they had an effort to do some of this stuff. It got 0 Republican votes in the state legislature there, and the governor chickened out and vetoed it because I think he's afraid the Republican opponent was going to throw at him that you're going to ruin the character of Westport by allowing new dense buildings to be built. Whereas in California, people have been able to take that leap in part because they got arm in arm with conservative Republicans and took the leap together.
Speaking of affordability and real estate capital, producer Jason, do we have the President of the United States Truth Social from today on hand?
What did you say? I missed it.
This is pretty good.
What is it? Well, our monitor's not on, by the way.
If our monitor was on, it'd be easier to read, generally speaking.
This is what you get for union labor.
Wow.
If you hire too many Mexicans, Mohican. You're like a good American.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Moynihan, you want to read this?
For a very long time. No, very long. Buying and owning a home was considered a pinnacle of American dream. Blah, blah, blah. Where is the bad part? People live in homes not... Oh, this is the thing.
It is for that reason and much more that I am immediately taking steps to ban large institutional investors from buying more single-family homes, and I will be calling on Congress to codify it. People live in homes, not corporations, Josh Barro. I will discuss this topic, including further housing and affordability proposals at my speech in Davos.
That's a turn. I didn't see that.
Wow.
Close you up.
We're just doing Davos. Is that a good idea?
See, he says affordability.
Exactly.
He actually capitalizes it, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a band.
It capitalizes most things.
That is.
I hate this.
That's like. By the way, I was doing a story. The only story that I ever abandoned for the Vice HBO, the weekly show. I went to do a story because somebody had pitched this thing of like, all of these communities are being destroyed by finance people, and it just none of the numbers didn't make sense. And I was like, and we actually went and we came back because I was like, we had the guy from the Atlanta Fed or something that we interviewed, and he's like, yeah, it's not true. None of this stuff is true. It's like, it's not what you think it is. Of course this exists. Of course they buy up distressed homes, et cetera. And this is actually helping in certain ways where there's nobody buying properties. And that was like the AOC person on staff that pitched that. And that just sounds like an AOC tweet, right?
I just, and it's far from only the president who has this weird dysfunction of thinking, but it's weird that, if you have one building that has many homes in it, people sort of understand intuitively that you might have one person who owns the building and rents out all the homes, or maybe all the homes are individually deeded to different people, and that both of those are acceptable ways to financially structure a building that has more than one home in it. But if the building contains just one home, or there's a plot of land and all of the dwelling units are separate structures with air in between them, then suddenly it has to be that each one is owned by the person who occupies it. And if it's owned by someone else who's renting them out, that's bizarre and bad, for society. Why? What is this arbitrary thing about how like apartments can be rented out, but if it's a standalone structure, suddenly it's bad for there to be a landlord there? I think people haven't really thought that through, and there are practical reasons why you don't tend to rent out single family homes, which are that the maintenance needs are different and more bespoke, and it can be more costly to manage them. But that's not about the appropriateness in society of the idea that the home could be owned by a different person than who lives in it. Also, the vast majority of single-family homes that are rented out by mom-and-pop landlords. It's a tiny fraction of them that are owned by these real estate investment trusts or by Blackstone or I forget which of the it's Blackstone that owns them. BlackRock has a whole page on their website about how we don't do this.
Yeah.
You're looking for Blackstone.
Who makes the massage tool that I got for Christmas? 'Cause
That's
Brookstone.
Brookstone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brookstone's great.
They're the real monsters.
Is that what you call it? The
actually.
massage tool?
It brings me a lot of satisfaction.
I'm sure it does.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
a lot
so-
of satisfaction.
And so, if these homes are owned by landlords, at the margin, those are homes that are not available for purchase, but it means there are more homes available for rent. And there are some people who are in a financial situation, maybe they're only living somewhere for a year or two, or maybe their wealth is tied up in something else, or maybe they don't have the wealth for a down payment, where they actually benefit from the ability of being able to rent a single family home instead of owning it.
What would be the practical kind of conclusion of something like this if it wasn't knocked down by a court, et cetera? If something like went through that Blackstone, BlackRock, whoever, Blackstone, couldn't do this and would have to either sort of surrender its previous portfolios or not build new ones, what happens to those houses that they would ordinarily buy? The presumption here is that people would just go out and buy them, mom and pop would buy them. They don't have the opportunity because these big behemoths who have all the money do it. Is that what would be the effect of that?
So, it depends on exactly how you write the law and what you say about who is allowed to own the home. I assume they wouldn't prohibit the renting out of a home in general. And so there'd have to be some definition of what's an institutional investor. And I don't know exactly how that would look. The other thing is that this isn't just the purchase of existing homes. There are whole new developments that are being built around the country that are new homes that are being built to be rented out that are freestanding structures. So I guess if you prohibited that, then, you would prohibit that kind of building, and some of those developments would not pencil as for sale. Yeah. So you'd get fewer homes built, and it would be more expensive to get a home in the country. So that certainly strikes me as bad. You'd also have fewer construction jobs. But I don't think that they will probably do this. The president throws out a lot of things. Very few of them actually turn into laws. I don't think that they'll have a bipartisan agreement on exactly which kinds of landlords we want to screw and on what terms. So my hope is that the dysfunction of Washington is going to save us this time.
Also ambiguous where the authority comes from to do this.
Well, that's a tip. I
guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is why he is a Chavista. Yeah, the authority comes from him.
Well, he's a New York Republican. They don't, they didn't read Hayek. They don't really believe in the power of markets. That's why, if he were here in New York, he'd probably be demanding 2 workers on every subway train.
Yeah. One of the original tells among certainly libertarians, but a certain type of free market conservative that maybe Donald Trump wasn't all the way with him, was in 2015. He was already busting people's chops about Kelo versus City of New London. He's like, what's the problem with that? It's a great decision. We need to have
eminent domain.
We need to have eminent domain. The government to be able to declare eminent domain and then give a property from one private owner to another one who would do a better deal.
Well, that's and it's again to Josh's point. It's the kind of John Lindsay problem in New York Republican politics. Remember when Bill Buckley ran for mayor, he ran on the Conservative Party platform. It was why we have a Conservative Party here that no other city does, was because the kind of Rockefeller Republicans didn't really care about markets, and Buckley made that argument about John Lindsay that he's basically a liberal and he doesn't believe in free markets.
Very handsome, though. Very handsome guy.
Yeah, and Mike Bloomberg did a lot of things that I think were good as mayor, but one of the things he did is, what a lot of outer borough neighborhoods wanted that, were the coalition that elected him as mayor and that are the more Republican parts of the city, is they wanted to be downzoned. And he did a lot of that. There was a lot of neighborhoods in southern Brooklyn and eastern Queens where Mike Bloomberg pushed through reforms that made it harder to build new housing in the city. And that's, in part because that's what that coalition demands. The city council here, when it, considers things to allow more building, it's very often the communists who are better on the zoning issues than the so-called moderates, which is, an unfortunate situation for me as a centrist Democrat, but it is what it is.
I wonder how many of you or us collectively watched the full speech that Trump gave, which is 90 minutes yesterday.
Never.
No, I didn't.
But in that speech, there wasn't much in the way of actual policy talk. There also wasn't a heck of a lot of foreign policy talk.
Did he give a 90-minute speech yesterday?
90-minute speech, yeah.
What's it about? I don't know. Not even aware that it existed.
Well, what it turned out to be was just kind of a greatest hits. It's a bunch of jokes that he tells on the stump on a regular basis. There was some culture war fodder in there.
He did an impression of a transgender weightlifter at some point. That was the only thing I saw out of the speech.
Yeah. Well,
I've been doing that bit for ages, by the way. Kills.
that's kind of the highlight. I think what I mentioned mention it because it's what stands out to me with respect to this Truth Social post. It's actually domestic policy. It is sort of aimed at the sort of things that you would expect voters to be talking about. I think they might have talked about healthcare in that speech a little bit, but not in any sort of substantive way that reflects the kind of policy decisions that they might make. It's just striking me how strange it is that today there were some briefings on Capitol Hill for Congress about what's happening in Venezuela. There's a tremendous amount of conversation about Greenland and what we might actually do or might not do. I suppose some new reporting today that Marco Rubio has assured someone.
Did you think that was over? Like that joke is done?
No,
well, it's not.
I told you guys. I told you at the time we're gonna do the Greenland.
Yeah,
and I was right.
Although there's some question about what "do the Greenland" actually means. I mean, I'm just curious what your take on how to think about the Trump presidency going forward and what to take seriously and not take seriously. I mean, the news cycle that we've invested in. Oh my God, they're threatening to use the military to take over Greenland. I don't know if they quite threatened it so much as someone asked the question, are you willing to rule this out?
Yeah, but the answer is no.
The answer is no. That's a threat.
I hear invading a Danish territory.
And even Marco Rubio's apparent explanation to Republicans in Congress was, we're not going to invade. We're just trying to pressure them into selling it to us.
We're threatening them.
We're threatening our ally with this idea that we might invade their territory because we're trying to extort them into selling territory to us that they don't want to sell. I mean, that's still really bad.
I think he just got impatient with the dissolution of NATO. It's like, this Ukraine stuff's taking too long, right? We're just going to actually try to invade fucking Greenland.
But if he does, this is a very, very big problem for him. I mean, if they try to do something like this, and he's obviously on a high now after Venezuela, there is a small thing that I don't think many people noticed. A NATO official, it might have been a Dutch or a Belgian one, said, no, we're looking at how to respond to this. As NATO, an internal NATO thing. And it's not like, an Article 5 declaration from somebody within NATO, but it was something about seizing American bases in Europe and making it difficult for America to operate militarily in bases in Europe. Creating these problems is absolutely, totally unnecessary. If the man is a deal maker in a business sense, maybe there's a deal to be made and maybe there's not. But this is mafioso stuff that you better comply. We're going to break your fingers and we're going to break the windows of your shop every day until you comply. That is not deal making. That is mafioso, strong arm politics. And but to do it in Denmark, you know how many Danes died in Afghanistan and Iraq? It's shocking. Considering all the other European countries, the Danes were there with America. Was that a good decision?
They meet their NATO spending obligations.
They meet their NATO spending, yes.
They also have alignment with American MAGA conservatives on immigration policy
Very
stuff. If these people are looking at Europe and trying to figure out who the good guys are and who we should be nice to, Denmark should be at the top of the list. But they're completely ungrateful.
And because that foreign policy document was all about immigration in Europe, and it's all about losing the European character of Europe from codified in a document by the Trump administration. And as Josh points out, it's the only country in Europe at the moment. There's a couple that are closer where the far right party disappeared. Because the Social Democratic Party took on all of its policies. So the Danish People's Party, which was for a while polling very high, is almost non-existent in Denmark now because they push the politics to the right on immigration. And to that point, it's like, if you guys are doing policy documents about what the administration should be doing vis-a-vis immigration policy in Europe, Denmark is your example, the one that you would be follow them.
But the other thing about the high after Venezuela is what have we even accomplished in Venezuela?
Regime decapitation.
But his vice president is now running Venezuela.
It's just regime decapitation.
Everyone else is
the heads off. That's it.
And we got the oil. And then there's a new head. And maybe we're going to cajole them into doing some concessions for us around oil, and who knows for how long that'll work. But the reason that we didn't put in Maria Machado in there is not because Trump is mad that she got the Nobel Peace Prize and he didn't. It's because we can't, because we don't have troops on the ground and we have not actually dislodged the regime that is there. So I guess getting Maduro is some sort of accomplishment in itself, but it's not that big an accomplishment. It's not. We are not in fact running Venezuela.
And I think that we're waiting for those knock-on effects, but it is one thing to do that. In the Bay of Pigs invasion was a year and a half after Castro took power. This is 26 years of Chavismo.
Yeah.
This is not easy to dislodge. When I was in Caracas,
it's narrowly impressive.
it's narrowly impressive, but it's like the second thing is like we didn't even think about it because it's too complicated. When I was in Caracas, I was with a police force, out with the police force on patrol, and the other police force on the other side of this area of Caracas was pro-Chavista and they were anti-Chavista. That has all been uniform now. They have taken control, particularly because that was Chavez's time. Chavez was still alive. But Chavez is an authoritarian, verging on dictatorship. Maduro is an absolute all-consuming dictator. He was weak within the circle of Díaz Caballo and all these people. But at the end of the day, Josh is right. I mean, how do you get Maria Corina back into Miras Flores? Because, she technically won, her cutout technically won the election. No, I agree with Marco Rubio on this, that you do have to do some negotiations. I just have no confidence that they know what they're doing or have any of. I mean, we'll see. We'll wait and see. I mean, the achievement of getting him here is impressive because they got him without a single American life being not even nicked by a bullet, which is impressive.
Well, no, there were 7 American servicemen who got injured.
Oh, is that? So the other day there was shrapnel. Yeah,
and last I saw, 2 of them were still hospitalized.
Oh, okay. Because the initial reporting was nothing, but okay, that's been clarified.
And we joked about it earlier in the show, but the Cubans who were protecting him. Is it possible that
just
by
like
taking
Cuba doesn't work very well,
but by taking out the head of state, who wasn't particularly popular and didn't have the loyalty of everyone there, that you've actually made things worse? You left everything else in place. You've taken out this weak link. You've given them perhaps a kind of a thing to rally around. Their contempt for the United States who was just here. Well, could it make things worse?
And this is a really good point because. There's a state channel called BTB, and they have it's like the PBS, but like Fox, communist Fox News, but it's PBS. It's the most insane thing, and they have a show called La Joya. It's this Mario Silva guy who is like the communist Bill O'Reilly, and he literally does a show in front of pictures of Lenin. It goes Lenin, Mao, and every night for 20 years it has been about the gringo imperialist invasion, and they're coming to take our oil. And it's like, guys, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh.
Yeah, like you couldn't script this better for them.
Because Trump, of course, is like immediately starts talking about oil because it's the only language he understands. His business, we're going to take it. And it's like, doesn't even understand how difficult all this will be, how much infrastructure has to be rebuilt, how much that'll cost the American taxpayer, too. I don't know who's going to foot this bill. But the thing about that is like, you gave them that little thing. But what they're relying on, which is very, very stupid, is the CIA assessment says Maria Corina Machado doesn't have support within the military. Chavez understands this. Chavez became Chavez in 1992 by fomenting a coup, right? 100 people died in that coup, and then he did a very, very brief interview. They had cameras on him, and he said, no, they said, are you done with this nonsense? Are you done with this? And he said, I'm done. And they said, por ahora, for now. And so all over Venezuela is por ahora. It was like, it's this thing. The coup was big. What did he figure out in 99? Democratic way. And then 2002, there is a coup. And he is unseated. But the military brings him back. This guy named Pedro Camora, who is in and out quickly. And after that, they made that military the tightest thing. You will not. Do they still have them? Can the opposition get them? No. They've done a very, very good job. So the idea now is you decapitate the head of the snake, right? And we can't have boots on the ground. That's what I told you, boots on the ground, despite the fact that he says we might have boots on the ground. And we did it in a very hands-off way. The idea is that a power vacuum will end in a good result. That is a very, very dangerous bet, right? Yeah. And like Díaz-Diallo, who's like the number 2, and Delcy, who's the woman who's basically behind Sabine, the secret police, and those torture chambers, it was called a moderate in the New York Times many times. It's insane. And Venezuela on Twitter blew up. They're like the moderate, and everyone was freaking out and doing all these memes about it. Yeah. But you don't have any good options because after 26 years, Chavez used to allow the opposition to have primaries. Enrique Capriles, by the way, is in the National Assembly now because he's kind of controlled opposition. And now there's nobody left. 9 million people of a country of 26 million people left. It's incredible. A third of the country leaves, and you expect this power vacuum is going to create what is the first thing they do the other day? They said if they're stopping people at checkpoints, and this is actually proven now, looking at their phones to see if they've supported what happened and arresting them. Merida, the area The police department posted it on Instagram. It's up there. They didn't take it down. Of 2 people with their hands behind their back, facing the wall, and they said, "We arrested these people for celebrating." That was the word, celebrating the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. So those people just on Instagram, they've been arrested. There's nobody out in the streets. Why not? Colectivos, they understand this stuff. So America made a very, very weird bet here. I'm very happy that he's gone, but I don't see any possibility in the short term, without further American intervention, that there's going to be a facilitation of a new democratic or free elections.
Well, but I think the Trump people have a theory that what they can get out of this is that they can, take the existing, bad regime and cut a new deal with it and basically say, you're going to pay us off for us not to invade you.
Yes.
That's not a credible threat.
No. That's not how it works in Venezuela either. Yeah.
I mean, it is a credible threat. That's the thing. It's not credible from my point of view. I don't want my government to act like that. We're shredding whatever soft power we might have ever had. We're shredding an idea that there might be some kind of sense of international legitimacy and a bunch of other things besides, and constitutional order. But like, we can threaten it and we can make it happen.
But a smash and grab operation is one thing. An actual invasion is another, where you actually deploy enough troops to hold this place, and you're going to need congressional approval at some point.
No, you're not.
After 60 odd days, you will.
Are you?
So you will.
Did you in Libya?
I'm just saying that.
No.
NATO.
It's
NATO operation.
That's done. I mean, you could invade enough to control the oil, probably, I'm guessing.
But given what we've seen, the response to this from Republicans and Democrats alike, if it were more than a smash and grab operation, I actually have to imagine that there would be a great deal more resistance than we've seen thus far.
Look at you. It's so cute. It's so cute.
Yeah.
You think that there's a Congress. That's funny. Yeah. But I love it.
But this goes back to...
Remember I used to call him Black Ron Paul? Yeah. I have a new one. Black Elliot Abrams.
But this goes back to the question of, did Marco Rubio cut a good deal with the devil?
Yeah.
He's there and, he compromised a whole bunch of his principles, but he gets to enact what foreign policy he wanted in Latin America. But has he?
Narrowly.
Like, I don't think Marco Rubio's grand dream was that we would extort the Venezuelans into giving us some cut of their oil revenues.
He would love Machado to be in charge. Of course he would. He nominated her for the fucking Nobel Prize.
Yeah, and he's not getting that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the hope is the knock-on effect of Cuba. I mean, Cuba gets most of its oil now from Mexico, and people are pointing this out without pointing out the next sentence, which is they get it for free from Venezuela, which is great. They don't have a lot of convertible currency to keep buying this from Mexico. So that is what I expect. And I gave the most negative possible gloss on this. The positive one would be when you have somebody like Delcy Rodriguez, who was in Qatar, apparently, negotiating with the Americans, and Maduro is like dancing on stage, totally fucking the idiotic bus driver who's not paying attention. Yeah. Like those two power centers of Diaz-Dio and Delcy, if they start going after each other, yay. If they start tearing each other apart, yay. I don't expect that that's going to be a great result.
Civil wars, yay.
Yeah, but it's civil wars within Chavismo, I'm okay with. And I think most people in Venezuela, like there's the desperation after this long is a reason why you can cut together video of Venezuelans all across the world shrieking on their lungs in Switzerland. And in these great videos, this is my favorite genre video now, I'd said asking if there's any Venezuelans at a protest. Have you seen this? There's these videos, one that was great in Switzerland with this guy who's Venezuelan, exile in Switzerland, going around to a protest. He's like, Venezuelano? And they're like, what? No one is Venezuelan, and there's like fights always happen because it's just a bunch of like dreadlocked white people.
I think to Camille's point about the possible backlash that this could generate, a rally around the flag effect. I can't speak for Venezuela, not having been there. 26 years is a long time, not as long as Cuba's, 67 or however you measure it. But I feel confident in saying that if we did this exact same thing with Cuba, right? Just took out the dude with the hyphens name and his wife too. There's just it's the other like one with the hyphen in Miami that makes me like I
Diaz Balart.
Exactly. I can't. I have no.
This is Diaz Canal.
Mangu Ward is correct when she says hyphens are bullshit. Let's just throw that out. But anyways, if they just decapitated the Cuban leadership. Try to cut a deal with someone, had no boots on the ground, but just did a little thing and blew up some Cubans along the way, of course. And then took over, I don't know what you would take over, not the sugar industry, but maybe the diamond industry, which the Canadians have been investing in over the years. what effect would that have among Cubans? They'd be like, fuck those guys. There would be huge celebrations of every single member of the Cuban diaspora in Florida, in New Jersey. Menendez would be shaking something in jail somewhere.
Yeah.
People would be totally
Throwing gold
psyched
bars in the
everywhere
air.
except for Cuba. Cuba, it's like the propaganda has come true. And there would be a rallying around. There would be fear, too, because of the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution on every single fucking block in the entire country.
Which, by the way, is a model they exported to.
Which they exported. Yeah. But I think that there would be a rallying around the flag effect, and you wouldn't be closer to Marco Rubio's dream of a free Cuba in that instance.
No, I mean, the best thing about the Venezuelan experiment, there's nothing good about it, but it is the best thing from an ideological point, is to prove, we knew this, but everyone's always arguing this is not true, to prove that, good Lord, does this type of economy not work? This type of socialism not work? You had oil that, I found an article from 2006 that was celebrating that the oil was $50 a barrel. It got up to $140 a barrel. And that was at the time that I was there. I was in this slum that I was like, this is insane. And the first thing that I thought of is when you go to oil-rich countries that are also dictatorships or authoritarian regimes, you go to Qatar, you go to Saudi Arabia, you go to, you're in Abu Dhabi, everything is sparkling and brand new and fancy. And like Venezuela had all this, and it was just the most horrifying places that smell horrible. Violence was crazy. The poverty was crushing. And it's like, well, yeah, he ended poverty. It used to be. I was on MSNBC the night that Chavez died, or the day that Chavez died, and Chris Hayes, who I was great because there were all these people. They're all like Chavistas on MSNBC, and I was the only one. And I said something about inflation, and the guy was like, this guy from The Nation, what's his name, Greg Grandin or something, said, oh, it's inflation. It was like, and he said 30-odd% or something. And Chris Hayes was like 30% is a lot. And I was like, thank you, Chris, for coming to my defense here. But that, at that time, you couldn't get foodstuffs because of price controls, because of inflation, because of the two parallel currencies. And it was like you reduced poverty in a way that the second oil prices went down, nothing changed. And that is a desperate country that has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Yes, it's difficult to refine that oil, but if you're smart about it and you have leases and concessions to American companies, not just the scumbags and Chevron, you can look at the video of Caracas from the 60s and 70s. It's like, wow, what a beautiful city. And it's not what it looks like now. So the only positive thing is like, do you guys get it yet? You have all the oil in the world and you still can't fucking make it work. It's unbelievable. So anyway, don't nationalize industries.
We probably got to punch out of here pretty soon. Judge, I did want to ask you, though, about the Straits.
Mustache.
Yes.
Because the mustache, too, but it's not unrelated. But the Straits.
Yeah.
About the what?
The Straits.
I'm worried about them.
Straits.
He's expressed
That's
some
why he grew the
concern
mustache.
about you.
Yeah.
I don't count myself in
No,
that.
I
I've been
take him
married too
seriously, and I'm
long,
like, Freddie
so.
Mercury's talking to me, and he's telling me what to do. Yeah, the Straits.
Yeah.
You're concerned.
Are you guys okay?
In what way?
Michael is not.
Nice.
I think in a different way than you intend.
I mean, I just, it's been building over like more than a decade, but just the amount of like just bad mouthing of men by women and women by men.
Yeah.
And relatedly, sort of like people used to be ashamed to go out and say, well, like I can't get a woman to love me or that sort of thing. But now it's just people are openly like, well, they're awful. And that's why it doesn't work. And you see this both
Like in the Nick Fuentes kind of way?
in the Nick Fuentes way. And
Although he's not quite straight.
Well, yeah. So
That's what he means.
I think Dick Fuentes is probably attracted to men, but I think there are a lot of like right-wing men
Dick Fuentes.
who genuinely are straight, but have just become extremely alienated from women and have convinced themselves of this sort of like return with a V idea that like women used to have fewer rights and fewer opinions and they just wanted to, like be in the house and cook for you and that was great. And now it's like they're all girl bosses.
I'm listening.
And then you have this parallel estrangement from women. And this is in, like The Cut and other publications like this, where it's just like all this like, men coverage. And they have like these essays about, hetero-pessimism. There's like a new word.
Hetero-pessimism?
Yeah, it's that it's I'm straight and I'm really unhappy about it because that means that I have to find a man even though I hate men kind of thing. And
you don't have to be straight.
Like this Vogue essay about is it embarrassing to have a boyfriend now, and
What?
that women don't want to show their boyfriends on Instagram because it's kind of Republican coded to have a boyfriend.
Is that true?
You have not been reading mainstream lefty journals of opinion.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hear
This
what you're
is
saying.
the cut is the center.
People
of that.
in my life don't want to show me on Instagram because they're embarrassed by me. It's not because it's white supremacy or the MAGA. It's just because I'm a bad person.
There's a whole like wave of like, you know what? I'm in my 40s. It's time to get a divorce, kind of thing. Like, you know, women should do more divorcing, written by and for women. Yeah.
Well, and also like on both sides,
missing all of this.
Yeah, you are.
the math in these is just often like completely divorced from reality. Like, I mean, first of all, you have like this idea on the right that, you know, what they really want is like a simple feminine waitress. And that's what high status men go for. And in fact, if you look at statistics, men with high incomes with high levels of education marry women with high incomes with high levels of education. And often once they have children, the women work less than they did before, but they still, you know, the women still went to Harvard.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, there was this New York Magazine article that ran online in the Cut about women quiet quitting their marriages. It's like there's a meeting every month where there has to be a new way to talk about this.
Like, it's quiet quitting your marriage.
What does that
It's called
mean
cheating.
exactly?
Fuck off.
And the author had just completely
I'm quiet fucking my secretary. So dumb.
We're
And the author
shush,
just-
By the way, I don't have a secretary.
right. Yeah.
But if you did,
Yeah, if I did. Yeah, but I do have a cleaning lady.
And the whole thesis of the article was built around this idea that like the divorce rate for women, you know, in late middle age had fallen by 2/3 over the last 4 decades. And I looked at it because that was a surprising number, and I looked up the source data and it was just wrong.
Yeah.
The author had completely misread these tables from the Pew Research Center. And in
I
fact,
mean, the woman from the Cut was not the statistician that you hoped.
you said it, not me.
See, 'cause he has a problem with women.
You don't. Yeah. These hoes from the Cut. Oh no.
But so like, you know,
I love the Cut. I don't know the Cut. It's Cuts in, I think it's New York. Is it part of New York Magazine? I don't understand.
It's the women's vertical of New York Magazine.
What is women's vertical?
what is the
about
cut
to
a
do.
reference to?
It's they also cover fashion, and I think like some of it is
I thought it was a Lorena
style
Bobbitt
thing.
reference.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I had to ask.
But cut your dick.
I just think, you know, like as gays, you know, we all have to go through this process where we realize that we're gay and that we're different, and that society may reject the identity we have for ourselves, and
Then
we
you
have
just
to
do a lot of fucking for years.
Yes, that's part of it. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's true.
Josh, are you making a sales pitch? Because I've heard this one before. Andrew Sullivan came on this show. It's like, being gay is gay. You should really, really try it. Is that
Did he
the
say
prescription?
that?
He did.
No,
yeah.
I mean, kind of.
He's stoned out of his
Yeah.
ass.
Oh, that's right. That was the one the listeners were like, what happened there? Yeah.
I thought it was
Yeah,
great.
he was really high.
Being gay is fantastic, and if you have actually made a choice to be straight, then like, you know, go ahead, make a different choice. Now, I think that, you know, sexual orientation is a thing that we can't really change about ourselves, and that, you know, straight men are, you know, genuinely really want to fuck women. But
you were
you know,
born with a mustache.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. You came out waddling around Weston with a huge mustache.
Yes, exactly.
I was like, oh my goodness. Didn't know I produced one of those. But my favorite thing, I just was walking over here from the West Village, and and I swear to God, they're everywhere. And if you walk between here and the West 4th Street stop,
gays or-
no,
no.
there was a poster of a guy. The gay, what was it? It said like "Homo Fix It" or something, and it was a guy. It was like a full color printout of a guy, and it was an illustration of a mustachioed, like muscular man, like, "I will come to your house and fix things." And I was like, "Wait
Yes,
a second,
that's
have
a
you seen this?"
But that's a prostitution.
And I was
act.
like, "Yeah, is that wrong or homophobic for me to think that like that's just about? It's like Grindr, but like with a hammer. Like, is that?
I mean,
Is that
I have a friend who like actually hooked up with his contractor. Like that is a thing that can happen, that they come into your house and
guys
they
are
put
shameless.
shelves up.
It
and
is
then-
unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's disgusting.
You have
I
Camille's
was like-
interest, I'm noticing. in
No,
that.
I told
First, you guys arrested Maduro.
But I mean, you know, to say like, wouldn't it be nice to be gay is like saying like, wouldn't it be nice to be tall?
Yeah.
Like probably, but
Yeah.
you can't go out there. I mean, well, actually, they do these surgeries now where they lengthen people's legs. I wouldn't advise it.
No, I'm not going to try that.
Yeah.
I'm into the
Jesse
face
Single on
smashing
that story.
thing,
No, because that's when men say it'd be so much easier to be gay. It is just a slightly more polite way of saying I want to have sex all the time.
Right.
That's how we look at you. Because I remember I was at a party in LA and this guy I didn't know, he was a friend of a friend, came and he had he had stopped on the way of somebody he met on, like, to you this probably doesn't sound weird, to somebody he met on Grindr, and he was driving from like the valley to this place in West Hollywood and stopped on the way.
Yeah.
And I was like, for what? And he was like, what? I was like, why did you, were you like getting groceries? He's like, no, I met this guy on Grindr. I was like, it's that.
Yeah, that's a thing.
It's a thing, right?
Yeah, you shouldn't use your cell phone while driving. It's dangerous.
Oh,
but
it's, yeah, no, it was like,
but like if you're in the back of the Uber, then you can tell the Uber driver please stop here.
Because that for us, that's like a fantasy story. Like, oh, I could just press a button and I could get to anywhere I want anytime. It's literally like a fantasy story. And then for you, it's reality.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I mean, there was also like 15 years ago, Esquire ran this really interesting feature on how Marquee Las Vegas runs, the big nightclub in the Cosmopolitan there, and it's describing how like if you're a guy who buys like the really expensive bottle service table, they like they're like, well, what kind of women do you want brought over? And like the guys express different preferences, or some of them are like just bring me a bunch of sluts. and they describe.
This is when you know he's gay. Like nobody talks about it.
Been a while.
Maybe the guy who gets the Fanta bottle.
And they describe this guy who he meets this woman. He goes upstairs to his hotel room. Yeah. He has sex with her, and he comes back downstairs. And then and it's like this straight man paid thousands of dollars to get the experience of what a gay man can get by walking into a bar.
Well, not any bar. But it's a specific. Right. Yeah. For you, it's free.
Yeah.
Wow, it's like sexual socialism. You just get whatever you want. Wow. Anyway,
yeah, sorry, we're off track here because I'm trying to get straight people to be happy with themselves rather than to pine for something else. People. It would be great if you could be gay, but you can't.
Okay.
So you should do a podcast series where you are like the Suze Orman of like straight. You like talk to a straight person and talk them off the ledge and like be more like a gay person and make your life happier.
Be more like a gay person in that you have to like affirmatively accept yourself and know how you are, and then go out and figure out how to build your chosen family and make your life based around your sexual orientation. Your sexual orientation you didn't choose, but you have to find the way to be happy. Now that you have that, I want straight people to get that agency back, and instead of saying men suck, women suck, say I'm straight and that's okay. And I'm going to figure out how to build a happy life for myself.
Have you given that speech to your co-host and an absolute favorite among our audience, Ben Dreyfuss?
Yeah.
And did it knock him off the ledge in a different direction than intended?
At what episode did you realize you didn't hire a gay co-host?
we know homosexuality isn't a choice because Ben would be gay the first second that was available to him.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you think. And for a long time, I was just like, I assumed he was gay. Yeah, it was like I used to call him. It was like Richard Dreyfuss's gay song.
Oh, God.
But he did say to us on this show one time.
The first time he was on.
When he was like, "Don't talk about my dad," and then we all just talked about his dad.
And then he told the Kevin Spacey story.
And the Kevin Spacey story. But his argument on the Kevin Spacey story, and Ben is one of the funniest people alive. But he was mad at Kevin Spacey because he hit on his brother and not him. Yeah. He was like, if he wanted to fuck me, I'd be like, I wouldn't denounce him. But like, he was like, this is my brother. He's like a total loser.
Well, this is one thing that like as homophobia has declined, there are a lot of straight men who just enjoy attention and then are able to like they go to Fire Island and they have a great time being hit on, and it's an ego boost.
But there's a backlash though. There's a danger, I should say.
Yeah.
If you do that, and you're in a
says Michael.
Hypothetically, one time
swim across
in Provincetown, when the guy's buying me a lot of drinks, and he's asked me if I wanted to leave. I mean, again, hypothetically, and definitely not hypothetically. I was like, I'm good, and then he like lost his mind on me.
Well,
because I told him I was straight.
Some of us are crazy, like any other.
Yeah, but like it's like I didn't know you had to be. It's like I guess it is in Provincetown. In a bar that was called like the Manhole or something. So I guess I should have maybe put a badge on, a straight badge. But he got very angry.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I have a straight friend who I've known since like elementary school who comes out to Fire Island with me once a year, and
so you're working on him.
Okay.
Well, we have, he gets hit on.
have kissed.
He's an attractive guy. Unfortunately not. But
Fortunately,
one of my friends is hitting on him, and he goes, "Oh, you see someone you want to have sex with and you can't? That's my life every day."
yeah, that's right.
That's funny.
Actually, that's the perspective I need to adopt, because the few times that sort of thing has happened to me, where someone is like hotly pursuing me, and I'm like, dude, I am not gay. You'll see. Well, we're gonna get there.
I love that's my favorite. It's like I can convince you. I'm like, I don't think you can.
No,
I don't think you can. But
yeah, I was born this way.
Yes, you were born this way, and that's okay.
It is okay.
That's okay.
Thank you.
You were
valid.
born Jamaican, and
Exactly.
it disgusts you.
Well, that's different. I was born in America,
Okay.
Yeah, but it still disgusts you.
but my parents are Jamaican.
yeah.
It disgusts them.
Yeah.
I've evolved.
Oh, you've evolved
Yes.
since what, like last week?
No.
Yeah, okay.
No.
All right. All right. Boujou
did I-
Banton. All righty.
Oh gosh, Josh,
Gotta
thank you
go.
for coming by.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Josh.
your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
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 We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse